Hey everybody! So today I'm going to be listening and reacting to some Harry Potter theories that Demi sent me. So let's go. Okay, you ready? Okay.
Alright, Jess, here we go with my first crazy theory. And this one totally freaking blew my mind, so let's see what you think. So the theory is that the obstacles that Harry, Ron, and Hermione face while getting to the Sorcerer's Stone actually foreshadow what they're facing in the rest of the series. So the first thing they face is the Devil's Snare, which is foreshadowing to another kind of plant or tree, the Romping Willow, that they face in Chamber when Harry and Ron fly into it. The third one is the Flying Keys, and this is foreshadowing to when Harry is fined on the Quidditch match and he gets attacked essentially by his memories he gets from the Dementors showing up at the match. The fourth one is the chess game, and this is really interesting because people say that it's kind of symbolic of a graveyard that leads to death. And so this is foreshadowing to the Triwizard Tournament, which is a maze that essentially leads to Harry ending up in a graveyard. And the fifth obstacle is the Troll, and this foreshadows to Glorp, Hagrid's brother, that's a giant, that they face in book 5. The sixth one is the potions, which is very clear what this symbolizes. This is foreshadowing to Half-Blood Prince, where it's all centered around potions and Snape's Half-Blood Prince's book. And of course, the seventh one, when he faces Quirrell in the chamber with the mirror, is foreshadowing to when Harry actually faces Voldemort in Deathly Hallows.
Okay, so this theory is like super intriguing. I've never heard this before. So it's really cool that Demi showed me this. Honestly, I love the way that they're going with this, but I think it's a little bit far-fetched for a couple reasons. One, J.K. Rowling, I don't think is a plotter. So when you're a writer, there's 3 types of writers. There's plotters, which are people who plan everything in advance. There's pantsers, which are people who write basically off the cuff. They don't even plot anything. They're just like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to write. So there's that. And then there's snowflakes who plot and then write off the seat of their pants also. So there's it's like a combination of a plotter and a pantser. And I don't think J.K. Rowling was a full-fledged plotter. I don't believe she knew what was going to happen to these characters, because this is a 7-book series, and a lot of the time, characters grow and evolve just like how the kids do because they're growing up. And so a lot of the times authors will say, oh, characters, they surprise you, as they grow up, or, oh, I didn't expect this character to do this, but in my head, I thought that's what they would have done. So I don't think she actually, made this a thing. The theory is solid and makes complete and total sense. And if she had intended it to be that way, then I could see it as, a canon theory. Because it's totally, completely solid. But I don't think J.K. Rowling was a snowflake or a plotter, where she had sat down and go, OMG, this is gonna symbolize this. No, I don't think she was that type of person. I feel like a lot of these theories are so interesting, but most of the time, people who are coming up with these theories assume that the author knew exactly what they were doing as they were doing it. It's no, I think a lot of the time it's coincidental. Now, I will say I really like the whole chessboard graveyard situation thing, because it's oh, well, the chess people are statues and they come to life in the whole task. And it almost reminds me of tombstones, how they can stand there, but it's Harry Potter, they could come to life. And then obviously we see Voldemort come to life in the graveyard. So that totally makes sense. The keys, I think it's a little bit far-fetched. It's they unlock Harry's memories. The Dementors do that. I think that's a little bit far-fetched. The Devil's Snare, it totally reminds me of the Whomping Willow. I could totally, definitely see that. Potions, Half-Blood Prince, that makes sense. Quarrel and the final face-off, that makes total sense because it's like, you know, Quarrel is Voldemort and Harry will face Voldemort at the end of all the books. I could totally see J.K. Rowling planning that and saying, oh, Harry's going to face the Dark Lord in every book that he is in, and then obviously, you know, the ending happens. I could totally see that as like something that she planned from the beginning. But as for like all of these things symbolizing that and maybe her planning that out, I don't see it. But I think that if it was me and I was J.K. Rowling, I'd be like, oh, yep, that was totally what I wanted to do. Yep, because this makes total sense. Yep, that was me. But I think most of the time, you know, a lot of these theories and these writers are just like, I'm just gonna see what happens to my characters. So, yeah. But that is a really, really cool theory. All right, let's do this, you guys.
Here's the second one, which is completely ridiculous. So, in this theory, people think that Mary Poppins is actually part of the Harry Potter universe. People say that she is a Hogwarts graduate who came far before Harry and even Voldemort's time. And so, since she didn't have a track record like Harry and his friends, they think she kept it super chill, and so she decided to move back into the Muggle world, but she didn't want to give up her magic. And people say that she's from the Wizarding world because of her often uses of levitation and flying spells, and also because of her carry everything bag, which is just like Hermione's beaded bag that we see in Deathly Hallows. And also, people say that she hid her wand in her umbrella, just like Hagrid did.
Okay, so I have actually heard this theory before. So she may or may not have known that I've heard this before, but I actually have. So this isn't new to me. I fully believe this theory. I am obsessed with Mary Poppins. I have been ever since I was a kid. Like, I loved the movie. I loved Julie Andrews. I think it's fantastic. And then when they did Mary Poppins Returns, I was like, oh, I don't know, you know, it's not Julie Andrews, but I watched the movie and I was like, this is fantastic. And seriously though, who wouldn't want like a nanny like her, to be honest? Like, I love that woman. I think she's fantastic. And the umbrella definitely reminded me of Hagrid's wand. Like, when I heard the theory, I was like, this is legit, because the umbrella, Hagrid's wand, the beaded bag, I love that accessory in the series. It's one of my absolute favorites. Like, it's totally genius because a bag that fits everything in it. Like, who wouldn't want one of those? But going back to the theory though, I think this is legit because, you know, apparently she lived at the time that Hogwarts was there, right? She lived there. I'm guessing she was probably a Hufflepuff just because she's very like loyal to people that she meets, and she's kind of funny and spunky and just kind of like laid back. And I feel like she's definitely a Hufflepuff or a Ravenclaw because, like I said, she's pretty resourceful. But I could definitely see her going to Hogwarts. And, you know, she's magical. She definitely is. And she's one of those people that probably couldn't find a job in the Wizarding world because her passion was nannying for kids. And she's like, oh, I don't want to nanny, you know, magical children because they already know all of my tricks. Like, they already know what I'm going to be doing. And so she was like, oh, you know, I'll nanny for muggles because they're so, like, in awe of all the things that I do. And so it was like, oh, here's the perfect job. Why don't I just go back to the muggle world? And, like, Hagrid, she doesn't really get caught using magic in the muggle world. Like, think about it. Like, Hagrid turned Dudley's butt, basically, or part of his tailbone, into a pig's tail. And he didn't get caught. Like, no one came after him. And so if the Ministry of Magic, like, didn't yell at Hagrid for doing that, then it's obvious that with Mary Poppins, they obviously wouldn't see her either. And so I feel like it's totally plausible. Like, you can go incognito and disguise yourself and just hang out in the muggle world. Like, I wouldn't want to give up the magical wizarding world to hang out with muggles, but I mean, to each their own. But yeah, I definitely fully agree with this theory. Like, it's so outlandish, but since Mary Poppins is like one of my favorite characters and Harry Potter is like my favorite book series of all time, like, my inner child just wants this to be true. And for all of y'all who are saying that it's not true, don't talk to me about this man. Like, just let me believe this. Just let me have this one. Just this one. Okay, let's talk about theory 3.
So I have one more theory for you, and this is super interesting, so I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So this theory says that wizards and muggles have fought before, and muggles have won. So this theory basically is saying that it's really interesting that the wizards have to be so secretive with the whole statute of secrecy and not being able to be seen and all that kind of stuff. The whole thing too with underage wizards doing magic and not letting the muggles see and all that. And so this suggests that it's weird that they have to be so secretive, because if the wizards weren't in power, they could hold very powerful positions and basically take over the world. But they're not. They have to be very secretive. And also it's interesting because, as we see very clearly with Arthur and the other wizards in the series, they have very little knowledge about the Muggle world. And this theory also goes deeper because there's a comment made in Goblet of Fire that basically says that the minister had to tell the British Prime Minister that they were bringing dragons into the country before they did it, which means that the wizards or the Ministry of Magic needs to report to the British Ministry or the Muggle Ministry. So that's all really interesting. So I'm curious, do you think that the wizards and Muggles fought in the history and the Muggles won? And people also think that this happened in the Middle Ages because even in the books, there are very powerful wizards like Dumbledore and Voldemort, but people say that their magic is nowhere near that of the Peveril brothers and the founders of Hogwarts.
Whoa. Okay, this is definitely something I have not heard before at all. Not a zip. When I was reading the series for the first time, I was kind of like, oh, well, they must have had some sort of conflict because of the statute of secrecy and the fact that, like, the populations don't know much about each other, you know? And then the whole department that Arthur works in, you know, he has to go clean up messes. You know, when there's magic or misuse of artifacts and things like that in the Muggle world, that's his job to go clean it up. So it makes sense that these populations are different because one's magical, one's not. But you would assume that, first of all, with Demi's comment, you would assume that the wizards would know more about Muggles, because if they're trying to cover up their tracks and say, oh, a wizard didn't do this, you know, they should know more about Muggles and say, you know, if your toilet gurgled up, the explanation you could put into their heads is, oh, it was just a plumbing malfunction. Or, oh, maybe someone's toy fell in the toilet and that's why it overflowed. You know, they would say something like that. And they would know more about Muggle society if they're trying to clean up wizards' mistakes. So that has always struck me as sort of weird in the series, that they don't know a lot about Muggles. And so obviously I knew about that stuff, you know, from just reading the series. But it's interesting, this theory saying that they won. Like, when you're having a war, you know, you're competing for power. So maybe if the wizards were in the war, they wanted power over the Muggles, or instead they didn't want to be discriminated against, which is why they were fighting them, right? Those are the two things that I thought of why they were fighting. Or the Muggles were fighting because they didn't want to be discriminated against by wizards, or like the Muggles were slaves to the wizards, because that's a possibility. You see in a lot of books these days where the magic users are all powerful and they take over and humans are slaves. So that could also be part of the fighting. So there's all these things like bouncing around in my head about why they were fighting. But if I was a Muggle and I won, I guess it would make sense that the wizards would stay away from me because I wouldn't want to be used as like a slave. Or I guess it would make sense that the Muggles would want to stay away from the wizards if they won the war. But I don't know, like I feel like there could have also been a stalemate. Like, why is it that the Muggles won the war? Why couldn't it just be that, there was a stalemate. The wizards and muggles went their own separate way because none of them could get what they wanted from the fighting. I'd always assumed it was just a stalemate. So I don't know, this whole theory just kind of bounces around in my head and I don't know what exactly to think about it, but it's interesting that someone took the time to think of something like that and come up with evidence, but I don't know what to think about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Our next podcast episode comes out on April 2nd, so stay tuned for that.